All right, well, okay, welcome everyone to We Are Endurance webinar, peer-to-peer webinar series. And today we're going to be talking about 80-20 running and triathlon with Ray. Ray's been using the program for 2 years now, so he's pretty, I would say he's pretty much an expert almost. So without further ado, Ray, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Hillary. Never an expert, still learning. So, uh, but today I'm going to specifically focus on the running portion, although basically what you're going to be learning today also applies to the biking and swimming, or even, I presume, to other endurance sports like rowing. Um, but basically what 80-20 is a process by which you do 80% of your training at a slow pace, which will be completely counterintuitive to a lot of people, for a lot of reasons. And by slow pace, I mean that which is at where you can, whether it's running or biking or whatever, you can have an easy conversation, with whoever you're with. And not like, okay, I take a few breaths, then I'll quickly get in a couple of words and take a few more breaths. It's got to be at a pace where it's an easy conversation. And for those of us who run in the weekend group, basically that pace, more or less, you could probably go a little bit faster, but that pace is an easy conversation pace. And I know that because Bill never stops talking, so I know it's at least easy for him, same for a lot of other people. And that's basically the pace that you can do. Now, the pace will vary from person to person, and I'll get more into how you can calculate what's your pace. But that is the part of it. That's the bulk of the philosophy right there, is doing most of your pace or most of your training at an easy pace. And what also distinguishes 80-20 training from other forms of training is that the ultimate monitor is your heart rate. And we'll also go into going in that. In biking, you have, cadence. You have, in running, you have what's your stride rate, things like that, your cadence, power meters, and all something. But 80-20 is at its essence about how do you do your training at the pace indicated by your heart rate. Okay, and your heart rate is pretty much your ultimate fitness guide. Your heart rate doesn't care what your pace looks like on Strava. Your heart rate doesn't have an ego. If you're out of shape, or if you're going at a pace harder than that, your heart rate is going to let you know. Okay, so what are the how did 80-20 come about? Well, basically 80-20 came about by a number of academics doing studies of elite athletes, and they found that the top athletes basically followed this rule of doing 80% of their training at an easy pace, and then 20 at a moderate or higher. Okay, but they also found when they applied to the average age grouper, which is all of us, that 80-20 also had brought about a lot of benefits. Now, can you hit PRs and improve by not following 80-20? And the answer is yes, you can. However, 80-20 is easier on your body, cuts down your risk of overuse injuries, and you can still hit a PR, which is amazing for those of us who, were competitive athletes in the past and grew up, thinking, okay, you always have to run harder, swim faster, if you're ever going to improve, because that's what you see everybody else doing. Okay. So what is the definition of a slow pace? Well, as I said before, if you can run and have an easy conversation, then that's where it is. But if you want to go into the exact metric, it's right where 75 to 80% of your maximum heart rate. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of a calculation? And so basically, if you start with the average heart rate, or you start with 220, okay, subtract your age, and then do 78% of that. So I'm 60 years old, so 220 minus 60 gets me to 160. If I apply 78% of that, I get to 125 is as the ceiling for my zone 2. Okay. And basically, what 80-20 training does is that it basically, and Garmin does this as well, although it uses a slightly different calculation. It divides all of your run paces into zones. Zone 1 and Zone 2 is being your easy pace. Zone 3 is being your moderate, and then Zone 4 and 5 being your hard paces. So that's 78%, or for me, 125 beats per minute is the top part of my Zone 2. So when I'm doing my training runs, and let's say if I did 5 training runs a week, 4 of them should be at 125 beats per minute or slower, and then the 5th one, an intense workout. Okay? You can also go too slow, so that anything less than 60% is not going fast enough. And for, again, this translates into 96 beats per minute for me. Okay. Now, that being said, your actual zone will vary depending on your fitness level. And I'm going to be following this up later with some more information on how you can calculate your zones. But that is the general guide. Okay. So what's going to stop you from doing this, or what are some of the obstacles for doing this? Okay. One, most people don't train at a slow rate. They're going to train at a moderate rate. So in this example, what's considered zone 3, or someplace above 125 to say 140 beats per minute. Okay. That's where most people are comfortable training. And again, it falls back on culture. You think you should do something at a higher rate, or this is what feels right to you as far as, okay, what can I be doing, or what should I be doing, or basically, this is what I've always been doing, and this feels right. So it takes a little bit of training to get into that pace, and a change in your mindset to get back down to saying, okay, slow is good. And even though I've been using this for about 3, almost 4 years, it's been a gradual adoption for me to get into that. I started with the running, and I almost really had to convince myself to do this, to accept the benefits, because it's a change. And most of us are in our 50s or 60s, and if you've always been doing something one way, it's tough to make that transition to saying, okay, I can run slower and still improve, get better. Now, on the flip side, if you do 100% of your training at the slow rate, you're not going to get that much faster, or you're not going to improve. And you may even regress because your body, exercise is like a drug. And if you do the same thing over and over and never vary it, it's going to lose its effectiveness. Okay? So the flip side of this is you still have to do 20% of your training at that moderate or higher rate. And in fact, I would suggest, especially, to push yourself during that 20% to get really in some high intensity workouts. They're important. Um, and Bill knows this through some of his workouts with his other groups. Those interval workouts really help. Okay. But again, you have to limit that to your 20%. Okay. And it's a change. You know, everybody who posts on Strava knows that it's going to be seen by everybody else. And if you're used to posting, say, doing your runs at a rate of, 10, 11, or 12 minutes per mile, and now you push it down to 13 or push it up to 13 minutes per mile, everybody's going to think I'm slowing down. Well, okay, get used to it. We're also all getting older, and we don't want to be out here, where you have to take 3 months off because you got surgery to, repair a hip or whatever because you've been overused. So let me get into a little bit about how this applies to me. How has it helped me? Because I was definitely one of those people who always thought, I should always be running, harder and faster all the time. So when I first, I'd say about 6, 7 years ago, when I started to really get seriously back into running, I found a book called Run Less, Run Faster, which was aimed at middle-aged runners who wanted to get better. And there were some good points about it. It introduced the idea that you didn't have to run, 5 or 6 days a week, which was great because my knees were really wearing out and I couldn't run 5 or 6 days a week. It brought in the idea that you should be doing low impact cardio on your off days, which was great for me because it really introduced me to swimming and biking as alternative means to build my cardio. So on those aspects, it worked really well. However, the theory behind it is that for those 3 runs per week, and that coincides with a typical triathlon training schedule, it basically was the opposite of 80-20 in that it stressed that you should be doing 80% of your workout at a moderate or high intensity level and 20% at the zone 2 or less level. So it was completely the opposite. And for a couple of years, I did get better. A lot of the hard work and then the off days, really did help improve my times. But I then reached that point where I injured my knee, not a running injury, but I injured my knee and then the recovery took forever. In fact, I eventually went to see an orthopedist to get looked at. But basically, all that intense work really built up, and as I look back, it was getting harder and harder to sustain that moderate to high intensity level. My legs were always sore. The pads of my feet were always swollen. And generally, recovery took much longer. And as I got older, that was becoming less and less of an option. So first I found not 80-20, first I found run walk, which helped a lot. And run walk has a lot in common with 80-20. And then Hillary introduced me to 80-20 through one of their other webinars with Matt Fitzgerald. And slowly I've been incorporating that into all my workouts. And as basically as I've gotten older, you really find the value in that. It's not just for the elite athletes, it's for everyday athletes. So I highly recommend it for everybody because it is a change in the mindset and it is a big help for me. One other example So last year, well, actually the year before, 2020, when the pandemic first hit, um, I did a virtual half Ironman, my first. Um, got through it, but really sore. And as I analyzed it, one of the things that held me back, or at least I felt that was holding me back, was that I pushed the bike too hard. And part of the reason why I pushed the bike so hard is that I always felt that my normal bike workout, not the interval workouts, but just normal putting in time, should be done at a certain speed. Because I thought I was, that kind of rider. Instead of really looking at, what my heart rate should be telling me was my true speed. So last year, I changed the plan around a little bit, or I didn't change the plan, I just decided to follow it really for the bike. And even though I was tackling a challenging course in Montauk, which is hilly, I was able to get it through with it much better because I did all my training at basically or most of my training at a zone 2 or less. And I dialed my pace back for the bike. And it really helped me because to get through that and also survive for the half marathon, because the half marathon course was just as hilly, if not worse, than the bike course. And so basically I was able to survive the whole thing. Okay. We can talk some more about basically the other aspects of it, but for anybody who is just being introduced to this topic for the first time, I'm really going to stop there because one, 80-20 training can get very complicated, but the biggest obstacle, and the one I want you to take away from this meeting, is the fact of doing 80% of your workout at that zone 2 or less. Okay. One other point, if you look at your Garmin, or for those of you who do have Garmins, and I don't know if this applies to Apple or not, Garmin also reports on heart rate zones. It also reports on zones. It also breaks it down into 5 zones, just like 80-20, but it calculates the heart rate a little bit differently. For them, it starts with the, subtracting 60, like me, from 220 to come to your maximum heart rate. But then it takes the top part and brings it down to 50%. So basically it's doing 10% for each zone, but starting at 50, whereas 80-20 by Matt Fitzgerald and by the academics start at your lowest rate is 60%. You can go into your Garmin and manually adjust that, and I'll follow up on how you can do that. But if you were to, look at your workout this morning, and I found this out just because I was doing some research for this talk, I found out that, if I went by Garmin, then my workout was in basically almost all zone 3. If I went by, the calculations, in the 80-20 guidelines, I found out I was really in zone 2. So if I had to, I would have been dialing it back if I just went by your Garmin. So it's when you're using your device, if you really want to adopt this, find out how, whether you're using Apple, Polar, Garmin, whatever, find out exactly how they're calculating it so you can adjust it, basically to the zones that you want to implement. If you in fact if you want to actually follow this pace, I'm a big believer in that there are dozens of training plans out there. This is one that works for me, and I highly recommend it, but this might not be for you. If you have a training plan that works for you, then by all means stick with it, okay? But if you want to start a training plan that helps you stay competitive and keep participating, And I really have a lot to thank for Run, Walk, and 80/20 to keep me participating. Then this is something that I highly recommend, because if I hadn't found Run Walk, if I hadn't found 80/20, I might not be still racing. So anyway, yeah.
So
Okay.
how did you, how were you able to overcome that mindset from Strava, of people looking at your numbers and you going way, way slower than you normally go?
Uh, you know, um, I think you have to work on that every day. Either that or get off Strava, because I still find myself and have to remind myself, it's okay to go slower. Because you see people out there doing some kind of monster workout at a monster rate, and you want to be there too, you know? And you have to constantly, at least I do, I have to constantly remind myself, it's okay to be slower. It's okay to be whatever rate is your rate. You know, stop comparing yourself with other people, and take advantage of the fact that you're out there with them, and they're going to do what they can do. You're going to do what you do. You know.
Mhm.
Yeah, Bill, you're on mute.
You hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. As far as Strava goes, if I said to you, tell me the pace one person ran 2 days ago on Strava, you probably couldn't tell me. I think we give more credit to Strava than it's due. Most people, they care about one thing, and that's their own run. And, like I'll do a run with us and it'll say 16:30 pace.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, what are my Strava fans? This is how people go on Strava. Well, kudos, 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 kudos. They're not even looking at it, half the people. And the other thing to that is, though, I decided a long time ago, the first time that I ever changed my run to make it look good on Strava is the day I blow up my Strava account. Because it's just not useful. And can I make one other point
Sure.
on the 80? My doctor actually likes the 80/20. She told me a long time ago. I was running, this is a long time ago. You can tell by the numbers. I was running an hour on the treadmill at a 15-minute mile pace. I was doing 4 miles.
I'm here for Jeannie's for appointment.
As
Jet.
as I
Sorry.
as I got faster, I was doing the same 4 miles, but it was taking me maybe 40 minutes. And my doctor said to me, she said, listen, I don't care how fast you go, I care how long you're out there. And I'd rather you do 60 minutes. I don't care about the pace than 40 minutes at a 10. She says, because all you're going to gain from the 10 is you're going to maybe lose a couple of water pounds extra, and you're going to get yourself back into PT. And ever since I slowed down, I haven't been to PT because doing the slow runs, I get to run a lot more often. If I don't feel like, on a day I don't feel like running, I just go out there, I'll walk the whole thing, maybe throw in a 15-second, I'll set it to 15:45. And who cares about Strava? And at the end of the day, I got my run in. So
I think that's a great attitude, Bill. I just know from my own self, when I look at somebody, I can't help but look at either their pace, or if I saw a friend of mine from college posts his trail bike rides, and I'll look at the elevation and stuff like that. And he does some of these great bike rides in Maryland where it's really hilly, and I'm always amazed at and I want to be like that, And I think there's always some of that in a lot of people, but if you can ignore it, fantastic. That's great.
I've noticed too on Strava that most people, I actually look, sorry, Bill, I definitely look at everybody's stuff. And I noticed that most people stay in that like 9-minute range. and they never deviate from that, or a 10-minute mile, whatever they are at, like the 8-minute, the 9-minute, they always are at that range. They never slow it down or speed it up. It's always in that range, every single workout. And I guess what you're saying is that that's not really feasible.
Yeah, again, it's if that range that they're always reporting at is at their, if it's always in their moderate range, and that's not really helpful. Unless they're part of the group where they can do that and still be successful. I don't know, every person is different. 80-20 is basically about the averages, okay? So maybe there's people out there for, who can do all high interval stuff, and be successful at it. They tend to be kind of, again, off to the side of that, not the average. I think this is something that works for a huge number of the majority of people, both for elite athletes and age groupers like us. But I think it's also important, like as you said, it's important to also get in high interval work. It's important to vary your workouts, even if you're just into running. It's important to, change, the number of miles you do in a day. What pace is that? That you incorporate different surfaces, whether it's going to a track, do interval workouts, or do hill repeats. You have to break up your run, if you want to get better, or if you just want to avoid that rut where your body's not getting the full benefits because you're doing exactly the same thing day after day after day. So, in fact, I know of one woman, it was the wife of an employee here at Vitaweek, who actually did, I think she did 9 miles every day on the treadmill. That was it, every day. And she actually ran into some serious health issues as a result of it.
Mental health issues?
No, no.
Doing 9 miles a day, every day on a treadmill?
On a treadmill.
Yeah, it would definitely kill
It's
me.
deadly.
I have to get outside. But no, these were actually serious physical health issues. So,
Ray, I got a couple of questions.
yeah, sure.
One is technical, and I don't have a Garmin. It's an Apple. When you're saying, okay, you want to hit 120, or that's your zone 2.
Yeah.
Are you, after the fact, looking at the data? Are you in real time looking at your watch? I mean, the Apple Watch will tell you what your beats per minute as you're going are. But is it you just get a feel for it afterwards? Okay, I'm going around where I am. I'll take a look. I feel good. I mean, a lot of this is trial and error, and a lot of this, as somebody starting it, which I think most of us are, you get kind of overwhelmed with everything, and just keeping 80-20 makes sense. So that's one question. The second question is, okay, how do you break the 80-20? So if you're working out 5 times a week, do you devote one day to it? Do you do 80-20 2 days a week? Do you do that every day? I mean, I assume you don't do that every day, but like, how do you break it down? I mean, the easiest, I guess, would be, if you're a newbie at this, is to go, okay, on this day, this is my 20 day, and I'll have a warm up and a cool down, but the bulk of my main set is going to be that 20%. Mm-hmm. Is that the way to break it down, or you just?
Well, to address your first question is, so basically, as I'm running, I'm checking my watch maybe a couple of times a mile, okay, to see if I'm within that, because, if you're listening to music or whatever, or you just get into rhythm, you can get out of your zone. And you can get out of your zone pretty quickly until you get used to it. I also, at the end of my run, I'll look to see where I broke out of it, just because, and it's okay if, for a short distance, you get out of your, your zone. So like if in this morning's run, I got out of it because when I get to a short hill, I like to run up it hard. Okay. But 95% of my run was in that zone 2. Okay. To your second question, the easiest thing to do if you do 5 runs a week is to set 1 run aside for, interval. If you look at the 80-20 programs, they'll probably have 1 run a week, which is all zone 2, zone 1. And then for, say the other workouts, there will be a little zone 3, zone 4, zone 5 in it. And at the end of the week, if you add up all those times, you're still falling into the 80-20. Okay. And perhaps the reason for that, and maybe we'll get Matt Fitzgerald back, is that it probably makes your overall workouts a little bit easier because you're doing something a little bit different each day. It's not like, okay, I'm going to do 5 miles 4 times a week, add zone 2. You're introducing a little variety into your routine, which always helps, and keeps you from getting stagnant.
And one point on the 80-20, is that by mileage or time?
It's actually time.
Okay.
80-20 works on the principle of time, except for swimming, just because it's hard to look at your watch all the time while you're swimming. But it's actually based on not mileage, which is another departure from traditional training plans, which are all geared toward for so many miles per week, run so many miles on this given day. These 80-20 is all about time. Run 60 minutes today, 5 minutes at zone 1, 50 minutes at zone 2, then 5 minutes at zone 1. So that's how, the workouts work.
So optimally, if you're, training for a race or whatever, you figure out how many minutes or hours you're going to run for the week, and then just kind of divvy it up that way.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you want to take it simply, and I would encourage anybody to start simply, just follow the 80-20 and try to maybe take your traditional program that you're comfortable with. And if you have, a traditional, half marathon program that tells you how many miles, apply 80-20 to that. And most of your traditional programs also have interval workouts worked in. And then try, apply 80-20 principles to that as well. If you want to get into true 80-20 after you go from that, then I recommend you get the book or download the program, and then, say, okay, here are the workouts, and follow that. Because that's how I got into run walk, and also 80-20. I took my old programs and I started incorporating elements into it because one, that's something I was comfortable with, and it allows you to adapt over time, see what works, what doesn't work.
Yes.
And everybody's different. So, Hillary, you had a question?
Well, I just wanted to add to what you were talking about with John. So the first thing is, John, you have an Apple Watch. Honestly, it's not accurate. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, if you do get a Garmin watch, you should get a heart rate monitor, because the watch is not 100% accurate. When you have that heart rate monitor, you really know what your heart rate is. And then the third thing that I wanted to say, I'm holding up 2 fingers, I can count, is that with 80-20, one of the points you made was, can you do 80-20 in a workout? I do that a lot in workouts, like especially my swim workouts, where if I'm going to work out for an hour in the pool, 20% of that workout is hard. Like I am going to push it, and then the rest of it's pretty easy. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, one thing you'll find if you don't want to get the heart rate monitor and you just use your watch is, especially doing intervals, your watch does a pretty bad job of, measuring your heart rate, because whatever the reason, the algorithms that it builds into it, it doesn't react fast enough to that, or it doesn't really know how to measure those increases in heart rate because of intervals. It'll catch up, but then it'll drop off. So any of the data that's collected through a watch, you kind of have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt and not, beat yourself up if, it's off a little bit. Take it as a guide. Yeah, Bill.
And I'll say, not for me, because I've done a lot of interval training, at pretty intense levels. If you're just starting interval training, is there a way to ease into this? Like maybe doing 10% or just doing one track, because you can get hurt. You can, this thing can be overwhelming. So what tips would you have for easing on in?
Yeah, well, I think that's the guideline, is to ease into it and take it slowly. Again, going back to this, run less, run faster. They had some, pretty intense interval workouts, and I shared them with you. And I actually really enjoyed them because it, made me feel great. It just wasn't sustainable over a long time. So you really have to take a look at the workout and pick a level that works for you. So, in the 80-20 book, and you'll find this with a lot of other training programs. Most training programs are broken up into 3 levels, like novice or beginner, intermediate, and then serious. So even though most of us, especially if you're trying something new, I would recommend starting out with a novice, because if the novice isn't big enough, you can always add intensity, you can always add miles, you can always add hours to your workout. Okay? However, if you start off, I'm an intermediate runner or I'm an intermediate triathlete, and you just jump into that, it's, you could really hurt yourself, in the worst case, injure yourself, miss your race, and you're a significant chunk of your year. So,
Steve had a question.
Yeah, Steve?
Yeah, I agree with Ray, particularly about the question that Jonathan had about jumping into, especially interval work. Because of who we are and what we do, in our minds, we have an elevated, perception of who we are as athletes. And it's not necessarily tied to reality, but it's also part of what motivates us. Right. So again, what I think comes down to is always looking for balance in what you're trying to do. But particularly when it comes to doing higher intensity workouts of any kind, we have to really dial it back and start out easy. If you're doing intervals at the track or things of that nature, you got to start slowly, go at a slower pace than you really want to, and then do some measurement, do some biofeedback of yourself, just as you do with all of your workouts, and then see how you feel the next day. Are you really worn out? Did the half dozen sort of sprints along the straightaway of your quarter-mile track, leave you hamstrung the next day? Or do you feel pretty good, pretty loose, like you could go out the next day and still do, a low intensity run, without feeling terribly sore? It's always a question of, doing measurements, which leads me to my next comment, which that Ray hit on something early on, which is that if you don't want to get too tied up in the metrics or the science or the watches and algorithms, perception, feel is the absolutely best guide. If you had no, and we come from a vintage where we didn't have all these tools when we were young athletes. You're right. Zone 1, zone 2, as you said, zone 1 is you go out the door and just starting out. You're just taking off from your house or wherever you are. That's zone 1. Your basic jog. Zone 2, as you said, is that point where if we were all running together today, we'd all probably be trotting along and having a conversation. How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? That's zone 2. You don't need anything else to tell you what zone 2 is. And the question is, how far can you go with that? And then you build from there. Zone 3, is a little like, okay, so, all right. Zone 4 is maybe, I don't know, like your 5K race pace, whatever that might be for you. And zone 5 is that 100-meter sprint, so to speak, or it's just break it all down, like a what is that? The concertina thing? Stretch it out a little bit to fine tune yourself, and you pretty much have the whole thing. You have your heart rate zones right there. If you wanted to do nothing really scientific.
Yep, absolutely.
The only thing that concerns me, Steve, about that is, I believe in RPE too, when you have no other metrics, but then you have like people who like we run with in our group, on a Sunday, and we're running very, very easy, and their heart rate is so incredibly elevated. And, it's a little concerning to me that happens. When it goes down fast, it's okay. But when it's so elevated at that pace, I don't
Correct.
know, maybe there's a problem. I'm not sure.
And you're right, which is why each of us has an individual thing. We could be on medications for congenital conditions. We could be at different levels of fitness. So again, it only really works, for where you are. But I was just speaking to, the simplest way to do it without watches and gizmos, because it's easy to get caught up in that. And you're right. And I firmly agree with what you said about the watches, because I don't currently use a heart rate monitor. And I know that my Garmin, just going out, is telling you that my heart rate is higher than it really is. There's no question about that. I'm not working this hard. I'm not going 170 beats a minute. I'm just not. So you're right. If you start playing with tools and gadgets, I'd like to hear more about what Ray said about making adjustments on the Garmin, because I'd like to be able to just glance at my watch and have a better idea of where I really think I am than what Garmin's actually telling me. So I'd like to learn more about how to modify your watch to be more accurate.
And now it's back to you, Ray.
Yeah, if actually you go on the Garmin FAQs or some of the Garmin website groups, they actually do have some suggestions on how you should be wearing your watch to make it a little bit more accurate. I've actually found that in general, Garmin isn't too bad, because when I've gone to various stationary bikes that have their own heart rate monitors, it's not exact, but it's not that far off either. It's within, say, 1% or 2%. But again, when you're changing speeds, it definitely does a poor job, and that's where the heart rate monitor. And Hillary may even convince me one of these days to go out and buy one. So I might actually, succumb to that one of these days. But as you pointed out, going back to just the simple basics, if you can have a conversation, then you're in your zone 1 or zone 2. Okay. The issue is when you're running by yourself, that's where it's easy to fall off that, because that's where you're going to trend toward zone 3, or on a really good day, oh, I feel fantastic, and then you go into high zone 3, low zone 4, because you feel great that day, even though you're not scheduled for, that kind of workout. So again, our Sunday runs are great because that's, for most people, that's a good zone 2 race. Although I do know, that there are other people where it's definitely higher for them. So,
Absolutely.
And for the swim and the bike, for those who are doing that, Ray, obviously the swim is all after the fact. You're just kind of listening to your body. Obviously, there's
yeah,
no conversation involved, or we'd all drown, I guess. And then biking, you have the added hazard of looking at your watch at the wrong time, and you're
yeah,
going fast.
You can get, the bike calculator. Basically, Hillary has one which just mounts on your bike, which makes it easier to look at. I don't have one, so I just, glance at my watch, every now and then to see if I'm relatively good. And again, but the same principle applies. If you can ride with somebody, still have a good conversation, then you're in, zone 2. So that's pretty good. For the swimming, actually, and this also applies to the other disciplines too, you can, there's the 80-20 zone calculator, where you can apply in different metrics. So they have a time trial test where you do it in its simplest, it's 200-meter warm-up, then 400 meters hard, rest interval, 200 meters hard, rest interval, 200-meter warm down. And you enter your 200-meter times into the zone calculator, and that will calculate all the zones. They have calculators based on other, functional power, lactose threshold rate, stuff like that. For biking and running too, like entering your last 5K time, and then that'll break that down to you. But for this meeting, this introduction, keep it simple. If this works for you, or you want to find out more, then there's lots to get into.
Okay. Well, what would your suggestion, totally selfish, on biking and just easing into this as far as interval, or like, I mean, I know with swimming, I know with running, but with biking, I've never really done any. What do you do? Do you go for 2 minutes at 120 or above, or 4 minutes or 30
I would
seconds?
just say, look, if you're going to do, let's say if you're in a novice program and you've got, say, 2 or 3 runs per week, 2 bike, 2 swim. Then for 1 swim, that's at your easy pace the whole day, or the whole workout. And then for the other workout, you'll have a warm-up, and then you'll do, say, 5 100-yard swims at what you think is a good rate.
Okay.
Put in a 30-second rest interval between them, and then you have a warm down. And then work out to see if that adds to your, 20% of your total swim. And then you can build it up, because you'll also be building up on your off day. You are also going to be building up, length into that swim. So first you may start out with, 1,000 yards easy. Then you're going to build up to 1,500 yards.
Right.
You're going to do 2,000 yards easy. So consequently, when you do your interval workout, instead of 5 100s, now you're going to go up to 7 100s or 10 100s, or break those down. Okay, now I'm going to start with 10 50s and stuff like that. Okay. However, if you want to build your program, you can do it that way. And then once you think if this is for you, then get the book or download one of the programs. What I do like about the 80-20 book is that it seems complicated, but each of the workouts are fairly simple. It doesn't get super complicated, because I've seen the swim workouts that Danielle gets Hillary, And those get pretty complicated. You know, where you'll see a lot of swimmers do this. They have, you know, an index card filled out, you know, with all their workouts because it's too much to memorize. You know, with 80/20, each individual workout is not so complicated that you can't memorize it ahead of time. Okay.
Anybody have any other questions before we wrap this up? Morris, Nicole, Janet, Jody.
Okay.
You did a good job, Ray. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you,
Nice
Ray.
job, Ray.
Thank you.
It was very interesting. Thank you, Ray.
Okay, thanks, Morris.